Welcome, Lewis and Brandon, to Metallarium Pages. It's a great pleasure to talk with you about Altars, this new amazing and fucking album, Ascetic Reflection, because this new album blew my mind in all ways. Is congratulations for that. So congratulations for this amazing album. And for the starting the question, how have you been during these crazy times? We started a pandemic 2 years ago, now a war in Europe. Who knows what happened next couple of years? Alien invasion, the machines takes the power, or who knows?
Yeah, I think we'd probably be better off if aliens took power, or machine taking over, or alien invasion, or one or the other. Probably be better off. It doesn't seem like as human beings we'd do a very good job of being kind to each other, or looking after the planet or anyone who lives on it. So maybe that would be better, but we've been okay. Australia is pretty isolated from a lot of those problems. It has its own problems, but we kind of, because we're an island way away from everyone else, the pandemic didn't affect us in the same way as everyone else. And it's the same with New Zealand and all the other sort of little island nations in the Pacific. We all had different ways of responding to it. So it's been okay. It's been hard, but it's been okay.
Okay. So I think this is the this one is a common question. Why the band delayed 9 years to release this new Ascetic Reflection? Because the last album was released in 2013 in Paramnesia.
Yeah, it's kind of complicated, but it's kind of straightforward as well. We released Paramnesia. It was quite successful. We were doing a lot of stuff. Kale, our former vocalist / bass player, who he and I started the band together when I was about 17. He suffers from a pretty severe mental illness, and it basically got to a point where we couldn't do stuff anymore, and I didn't really want to do it without him. And that was basically it. Like, there was no obvious replacement at the time, and so it just made more sense to put everything on ice. And then as time passed, I guess Altars has always been for me particularly very much sort of an expression of myself as an artist, as a musician. I was touring Europe with Ignivimus, playing Killtown and stuff like that, and I was like, damn, I really want to do this again with my own stuff. And so, yeah, I guess I'd sort of been planning to for a while. And once I got back, the pandemic was kind of setting in, and I had a bit of spare time on my hands and started working on stuff. So, and then, I guess now we're here.
Okay. So a question that I wanted to ask you is, why did you take the name Altars, especially for the band? Because Altars, if we try to relate with a lot of complex religions matters, with whatever religion the people believe. So why did you take the word Altars for the band? And what is exactly means for you the Altars name?
I'm not really sure what it means anymore. At the time of making the choice, it sort of made sense and felt just like it was right for what we were trying to do. A common theme, I guess, thematically in our music is kind of looking at, sometimes religious concepts or like spiritual concepts, like, Paramnesia is very much based on this life, death, and rebirth kind of cycle. So, it kind of fits in with that. And I don't know, it was just a name that felt like it hit the nail on the head of exactly what we were trying to do.
Okay. So other aspect that I noticed a lot and into a lot of it's like an influence in all Australia is that the concept of dissonance, especially in Australia and New Zealand, the technical dissonance and darkness music is now focused in Australia and New Zealand. So why these aspects what is occurring a lot now in Australia and New Zealand is have to do perhaps the society, perhaps something to have to do with the society or community there?
I'm not really sure. Like as far as we're concerned, you know, we're very much trying to do our own thing. I know like often we get comparisons to bands like Ulcerate and stuff like that. Ulcerate are a band we know well. We've played with them many times, and it's kind of like they were developing, doing their own thing over in New Zealand. We were developing, doing our own thing over in Australia. And, you know, these two bands, we have a lot of mutual respect for one another. I've never really listened to their music and thought, oh, I want to do an Ulcerate riff. It's not like that. We're very much separately doing our own things, and, you know, maybe sometimes they're a little bit similar, or there's, you know, some comparisons that can be made because it's, you know, within a similar playing field. But you know, at least me from like a compositional perspective, I'm very much kind of trying to break things and put them back together again. So it's less about being technical. It's like if it requires a more technical section, we have a more technical section, but the most important thing is just the music and the sound and the effect we're trying to achieve. So that's more or less it for me.
The thing to think about what it is about Australia in particular, that you end up with this sort of pocket of weird music. I mean, we have more straightforward metal as well, and particularly like my favorite genre of pizza thrash, like municipal waste, sort of like it's very straightforward rock and roll thrash metal, or like we have a couple of great progressive metal bands and power metal bands and things like that, and they're a lot more kind of straightforward. But I think the thing about Australia in particular, and lots of communities that are similar to us, we've got the continent size of like the continental US, but we've got the less than the population of California. So the people here who are into metal are really into metal, and the musicians that are into metal are really into metal as well, and they're constantly pursuing everything they can get. Or as children, like growing up listening to metal, they're isolated from everyone a bit. And so you end up just kind of accumulating as much stuff as you can from all the directions you can get it, and it naturally infuses into your music. And you as a musician, you're always interested in doing something that no one else has done, or trying to find your own voice. And the easiest way to do that is to take stuff that you already know and like push it apart a little bit. Like take the chord that you're playing in this Master of Puppets thing that you've just learned and like push it apart a little bit, and suddenly it's a different interval, and it's crunchier and dissonant, and it sounds darker and more evil. And then once you've done that, you go, okay, how do I make this even more evil? And you end up on and on and on. It's like when you think about bands like Portal, which is the one that everyone points to for Australia for being like the darkest thing to come out of Australia, probably. If you listen to it in the right way, you can hear like Bathory and Venom and all those old like first wave black metal bands, because that's where, and like Merciful Fate and all of those old like that's what you can hear in it. That's just they've darkened it significantly in the approach. So I think that's just the natural that's the natural progression of things, is if you obsess over music in such a way, and especially if you start, as Lewis and I have both done, getting into complicated classical music, like early 19th, early 20th century classical music, where it's very experimental in its composition, and you try to bring that into rock music, you end up with these weird arrangements and weird sense of harmony, and something new happens. And that's kind of just how it goes. And I think Australia has been lucky in that we're all so passionate in general about it, that we've ended up with a collection of bands who are all sort of pushing each other, not necessarily in the same direction, but as soon as somebody does something interesting, we all go, oh shit, now we've got to do something. And then we're like, everyone pushes everyone else forward. And so that's why I think we've ended up with Australia being the way it is. We're not unique at all. There's other areas of the world, like Italy right now is going crazy with just fascinating bands. And it's the same basic thing. Everyone's pushing each other to get more clever and widen the palette.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, for me, you have a lot of influence from Demolish, for as you said, a lot of first wave of black metal stuff, and Demolish, a little Gorguts there, and Immolation. Well, and Immolation, that's a a great influence for especially when I hear the both albums. I listen a lot of emulation influence into there. But that's nice. Is every band has their influences. That's normally for that. So talking about the aspects of the music. So for you, what is the biggest strange that this album has compared to your previous work?
I think overall it's a lot more cohesive. We were really trying to achieve like a very specific kind of vision. And I think towards the end of Paramnesia, like you listen to the back half of that record, I really love the back half. The front half, I don't love as much because it was really, we were just like writing songs and like, okay, now we have enough songs, we have the album. By the time we finished working on Paramnesia, you know, I'd really felt like I'd found the thing I was looking for. But then the whole album didn't really sound the same, you know, it changes quite a bit as you go from one to the next. Whereas this one, like, I guess I felt a lot more, you know, I was quite young when I did that. And I felt a lot more confident and self-assured in what I was doing, and that what I was doing, you know, was valuable and had something to contribute. So I guess I was trying to, with this one, you know, borrow some bits of Paramnesia, you know, so there was some consistency there. So it was not wildly different, but then take it on a different path and grow it again into, you know, something even more developed. So, you know, we tried a lot of new things as well. There are a lot of similar ideas, but then there's done in different ways, but then there's a lot of like completely brand new crazy ideas that you know, I can't really think of anyone sort of tried necessarily in like a metal space, you know, so trying to pull things from outside of the genre. And then, you know, like with classical music, like Brendan was saying, you know, I'm a big fan of like Yanis Xenakis, stuff like that. So you know, trying to borrow things from other places and seeing how you can sort of reinvent death metal a little bit, just to keep it still like, so it's still death metal, but, you know, just push the envelope a little bit. So it's not completely alienating, but, you know, so it's doing something interesting and trying to push the genre forward a little bit.
Okay. So now we are enter more into this new album. And for you, and especially for you, which is the best song to play in a gig for this new album? Which songs represent a lot, all the sensations, all the feelings that you bring us in this new album in just one song? Which songs for you is the best one to select for that, more than a single? Perhaps they relate a lot of concepts into there.
It's kind of hard to do for a record like this because of the way it's been constructed, in that the drops, the peaks and valleys in intensity that happen throughout the album sort of explain each other as you go through. If you listen to it as a whole thing, from start to finish, the bits that might seem confusing make sense by the end of the record. You understand where it's going and what it's trying to say. There aren't many tracks on the record that cover everything, but if there was one, it's probably the penultimate track, the one before the outro, called Opening the Passage. That's probably the one. It's not quite as riffy or as fast as any of the others, but in terms of the way it flows as a track and the sort of ideas and composition that it contains, I think it's the summary of what's going on the record. But if we're talking about like a barn burner track that you would play if you really wanted to impress someone with the record or make them go, oh shit, oh wow, it's probably Luminous Jar. That's the one that I would say we have the most fun playing. It's always the one that has the most energy because it's so fast straight up, and it requires a lot of you to perform it properly and a lot of energy. That's probably the one in terms of a death metal song to play for somebody. But if you wanted to play the clever song, it would probably be one of the longer songs. So that's where we took the chances of being a bit more emotional with it and to like try and paint a picture rather than just play a fast riff.
Yeah, the album really, written and designed to be listened to as a whole. It's kind of like one track itself, like the album start to finish. You can listen to it from the start to the end. You can listen to it on an endless loop. It's kind of designed to be one whole thing. And the way we're actually performing it live at the moment, you know, we played a launch show on the weekend, and we have some shows coming up in Melbourne and Sydney and Canberra in Australia. And basically what we're doing is playing the whole thing from start to finish, and then like a couple of older songs at the end. So, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of songs on there that, you know, they sort of work on their own, but they're not meant to. It's meant to be part of like a whole thing. So, you know,
that just comes down to the way Lewis and I listen to music as well, I think. And most of the songs were written before I was involved, but we have a very, or at least like the skeletons of the songs were composed before I was involved. But they feel like I could have written them if I was involved earlier. Like, that's because of how similar we are in the approach. It was a natural process to connect with it. So writing in this way and having the album be an entity unto itself, that it's hard to separate the tracks. It's kind of, it's the ultimate, it's the design, it's the way I design records if I'm writing them, and it's the way this one feels as well, which has been good. It's good.
Yeah, I definitely I don't listen to individual songs. It's just not how I like to enjoy music. So yeah, it just makes sense to us.
Yes, but for me too, because I this July 30, I will be my birthday, or I 42, so I prefer to listen all albums in a way. That's the way I love the first time when I hear the tapes, the tapes record, bad recordings, this kind of stuff. So that's a way. But if we try to relate this question, your answers with the new forms of hearing music, as you can see now, the digital platforms are the huge success for the new people, especially talking about the 15 or 20 younger people. So they love to do the playlist with 1, 2, 3, or 4 songs into the digital ones. So how do you see these aspects when an album like Ascetic Reflection is to need to hear the start to the end and not just pick one single, but the new generation prefer to hear one single? And relating to this, so why the albums now doesn't have the same impact compared to the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s?
I think people are still listening to music that way. It just depends, I think, on how you've grown up in a lot of ways, or what your changing relationship with music is. I mean, I don't have the time as much as I did as a kid to really spend hours and hours and hours a day looking for new music and consuming everything I can get. I still spend a lot of time doing that, but it's not nearly as much time. And so I think that's a factor in that. Now the way I'm listening to music is I tend to still listen to the whole album, but I'll listen to like the first half of it while I'm driving to work, and then I'll listen to the second half while I'm driving home. And it'll still be in order, but that's about as much time as I can get sometimes per day. Whereas before I was listening to like 5 albums from front to back every day at least. So I think it's for a lot of people it's just time, and for the rest of them it's just convenience. I don't know if it's attention span or anything like that, but some people just prefer to listen to music, like lots of different stuff, one after the other, or try to make a playlist with all of their favorite songs on it. And it's just something that's part of you, part of your DNA, that you prefer to consume art like that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It just makes it harder if you're making long form works to connect with those people sometimes. That's all. It's not really a bad thing. There'll always be people out there. And that's just like, I fell in love with the idea of doing this in metal, listening to Edge of Sanity when I found Crimson when I was a kid. I thought this is it. This is perfect. Well, like 1 40-minute long song with these like motif developments, and it's like an opera or something. It's absolutely perfect record. And there's still people doing that, like the Bell Witch record from a couple of years ago, which is 1 track that's like an hour and 10 minutes long. There's still a thirst for that, There's still musicians still want to write that way. People still want to listen to music that way. There's just less. So I don't think anyone should be discouraged from doing it. I think still do it because it's artistically valid for you. You should do it.
It's also an opportunity for people to discover a new thing. Like this kind of thing didn't really creep into popular music until the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Like that was kind of like the first in terms of like contemporary popular music in 1967. And prior to that, no one had really heard anything like that. You get it more in jazz and stuff like that with, you know, free form improvisation type stuff. And, it's possible that younger generations aren't listening to stuff in that way. I don't know exactly. I don't have any statistics on that, but, maybe one day, some 16-year-old kid's going to sit down and listen to this album in full accidentally and be like, holy shit. So, and then discover something new, and that will be something new for them because they're not used to consuming media in that way.
Yeah. Everyone will discover Rush eventually and will be vindicated.
Yeah.
Everyone will hear like Hemispheres and 2112 and realize that it's a good idea to make these really long narrative ideas in music, and that it's a good move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, returning to this new Ascetic Reflection, so you did an upgrade doing the cover art with Adam Borg for this time, because the previous one was did by the Dennis Forka. So how was the transition to change the artist, and what exactly why did you decide to change completely subject? Because the first Paramnesia or more black and dark stuff into there, but all matters. But this new one is all matters, but a lot of colors into there. So why this transition happened to the black and now more joyful colors? Who knows?
I fully intend to use a completely different artist on every single Alters release. There was nothing to do with being unhappy with anything. I loved Dennis's work. I loved Alex Brown's work on the inside cover, and I would have more than happily got both of them to do it again. But I think it's more interesting to branch out and do different things. I just wanted it to be different. I didn't want it to be a carbon clone of Paramnesia. So changing things up was important. And, I sort of discovered Adam a while ago when I was touring Europe with Ignivimus. We were touring with Chornabog, and Adam did the cover for their record, their self-titled LP. And I thought it was pretty cool, but also like that wasn't necessarily the kind of thing we wanted, but I could see his style and the kind of thing I kind of already had like a seed in my mind at that point about what, I didn't have an album title. I didn't have any songs really written except maybe one. And I could see in his artwork, I could see that he would achieve the kind of thing that was in my head. I knew that he would be able to understand and, transmute that into, the artwork that he created for the album. The process itself was very, very easy. I gave Adam a brief. In my work, I happen to work with artists on a daily basis, so I'm pretty good at briefing artists, but he took my brief, he came back with some sketches and some palette choices, and it was literally perfect. I didn't need to provide any additional instruction. Extremely professional, extremely easy. He just nailed it straight away. He completely understood what I wanted. One thing with Paramnesia, with the album cover, not so much on the CD and the tape versions, but on the LP version, because the artwork was so dark, the LP cover came out quite dark. And I did want to maybe use a lighter color palette. It's still very rich, it's still very dark in parts, but there's a lot more variety going on. So from like just a print production point of view, I was also a little bit conscious of that.
Okay, so now how can we relate the name of the band, the name of the album with the lyrics and the cover art? Because I'm reading all these new lyrics, and I'm reading They were like luminous jar, like perversity entity, some, like as you said, some metaphysic aspects into there. So how can we relate the name of the band, the name of the music, the concept of the album, the art in in one concept, or perhaps in many concepts?
Well, um, the title for the record is something kind of we came up with. It was a strange sort of. We arrived at the concept for the record in sort of a strange way, in that we just realized what we were doing sometime toward the end. Lewis seems to do a similar thing that I've done in the past, in that I'll give a track a title almost straight away based on how it makes me feel, and then that will usually stay that way. I won't call it like rainy day.mp3 or something when I'm working on it. I'll try and give it like the feeling that it makes me feel at the start, or the picture I have in my mind while I'm writing it or composing it. And we did the same thing with these songs. So a lot of the titles came before the lyrics, but in a strange way, the songs, they were always going to have those lyrics and always going to have the titles that they had. They sort of revealed themselves to us as we were making them. And the same with the concept of the art. Adam kind of over-delivered on the artwork. It's almost too perfect. There's a lot of stuff that he painted in the artwork that we didn't really brief him on, or that parts of the concept that weren't apparent to us at the time, which are featured in the artwork. So a way to look at it is the ascetics are in the cover artwork, and they're looking into a glowing orb, which sort of rotate, or like a fire or a dimensional portal of some kind, and they're off in an unknown sort of pure world, which is why the cover art is a little bit more joyful and bright colored, is that they're in a utopia, essentially. They're looking on the events of the album. And then inside the jacket, Derek's artwork discusses the narrative of the album, with the perverse and the divine looking at each other on opposite sides of a mirror, trying to decide who is the perverse and who is the divine creature. Because from one perspective, religious zealotry is perverse, but from the religious zealot's perspective, it's divine, and the opposite as well. Sometimes anti-religious people are seen as elevated above religious people, or more intellectual, but from another perspective, that's perverse, to feel yourself to be more intelligent because you don't have a religion. Or, you know, the album conceptually is all about mirror images and mirror concepts, and follows with the Ouroboros concept of paramnesia, of death and rebirth, and the cycles of people chasing after power and status, and ultimately being corrupted by it and dying, and then somebody else chasing after their power and status and going around and around. So there's lots of these themes in the lyrics and lots of these themes in the artwork that all contribute to the narrative, the overall narrative. There isn't really like a protagonist or anything, or like a main character, but there's a lot of duplicated themes across the tracks that I put into it while writing the lyrics. So like the perverse entity at the start of the song is also the eidolon in the lyrics. In the last song, in opening a passage, that same creature is present in the first song, and the person or entity in luminous jar looking upon the jar, upon the pithos, is present in Ascetic Reflection later, or in Anhedonia later. Like these same ideas are present and mirrored across from one side of the album to the other. So they kind of go, the tracks go from one side, find out where my camera is so I can do the hand gestures. The tracks sort of go like this, and then they meet in the center of the record and then mirror out back the other way. So conceptually, that we figured that out, that's what we accidentally sort of did at the end of the record. And it just so happens that Adam painted it so well that it's evident in the cover art. And tying it into altars as a name, I guess, yeah, as you said, it's a religious, spiritual concept of a place to kneel at and to commune with the divine, or a place where you can worship, or a place where you could bury someone or mourn the dead, or perform a sacrifice. You can perform divine acts, you can perform perverse acts in the same place. So it connects in that way. Excuse me.
Okay.
So in some ways, quite deliberately, there's no protagonist or something thematically in the lyrics, because we kind of wanted the protagonist to be the listener themselves, reflecting upon stuff. The album kind of conceptually is sort of like an allegory, which people can take and interpret, however they like. But we kind of wanted to encourage that sort of introspection and kind of people analyzing things, in terms of themselves and so on.
It's a complicated thing. There's lots of there's lots of subjects and topics that you could spend 20 minutes, half an hour talking about to try and figure them out. But it's not making a judgment about anyone. It invites the listener to make a judgment about these things, about themselves. It's trying to encourage, the title being Ascetic Reflection is trying to encourage you to strip away your preconceptions of yourself or of the planet or of other people and reflect on them and try to arrive at a more pure understanding of yourself and of the world. So it's not telling anyone what the answer is in any way. It's inviting you to think about it.
Okay. So guys, we are very close to in this interview. And what are the future plans that the band has for this new album? Video and comments, a Latin American tour, who knows, in the near future, a European tour, or who knows, more tours.
I would like to do, all of the above. It's if someone is interested, book us and we will come. It's that kind of a deal. We'd love to go to Latin America. We'd love to go to Europe. We'd love to go to the US. We all have, day jobs and stuff like that. So, if there's some promoter out there and they want to book us for a tour, we're more than happy to just get in touch.
Okay.
The main thing that stops Australian bands from going overseas is that it just costs us thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So we're not doing this as a profit-seeking exercise by any means. We're artists after all. We're doing this for the love of playing music. But in a sense, it's always hard for Australian bands to get overseas, just because you have to be prepared to lose a lot of money to go over there and do it. So if the stars align and we get something where we can afford to come and play for everyone, that's the ideal situation, is make it work. Book us and we will come.
It does make it a little bit easier being a 3-piece. We don't have as higher costs as say like a 5-piece band. It's 2x less members. So, it's not as hard as that, but that's all.
Okay, guys. Well, Lewis and Brandon, the sad times arrived at this interview. I hope you enjoyed this one as I did, and really appreciate the time and explain a lot of the concept of this new album. Really appreciate for that, Brandon. I learned a lot about this new album. So perhaps you want to add something to your Latin American fans and Metallarium followers?
Yeah, well, I wasn't aware that we had such a following in Latin America, and to be honest, because of Australia is quite isolated. So it's been a pleasure to find out that we have so many Latin American fans, because the country and the people are beautiful, and not often that you get to have a fan base in somewhere like that, so you can come and visit and enjoy the culture and the people. So we're very excited, and we love you all. We'd love to come and visit and play for you.
Okay.
I completely agree.